The hammer hit the steel like thunder, echoing across the motor yard as rain poured down through gaps in the tin roof. Red Mallory's hands bled oil and rust, his face lit by the flicker of welding sparks. Around him lay twisted frames, broken axles, and a dozen dreams that died before they ran a mile. He muttered to himself, cursing the day he ever tried to design a truck that could fight a war. They called it worthless. A mule that'll never pull weight, and sent him to fix the old ones that barely moved. Outside, engines roared and officers barked orders, while soldiers prepared for Patton's next push. But Red stayed in the shadows, the rejected genius among scrap metal. Then came her voice, Lieutenant Grace Porter. Steady, cutting through the chaos. She didn't ask for small talk. "Sergeant Mallory," she said, "I need a machine that won't die in the desert." Red looked up, eyes burning beneath the grime. "You want a miracle, Lieutenant," she smirked. "No, Sergeant. I want your worthless design." The sparks hissed. The rain fell harder. And somewhere deep inside him, a fire caught again. Would you trust the machine no one believed in to carry an army through hell? Morning light creeps through the yard, catching the gleam of damp steel. Red hasn't slept. The rain's gone, but the storm in his head hasn't. Grace returns, clipboard now filled with requisition forms she forged to get them supplies. "You're serious about this?" Red mutters, rolling up his sleeves. She nods. "If Patton's men can't move, they die. Your design moves them." He stares at the scattered parts, his own handwriting on the blueprints, a ghost of failure staring back. Ortega jogs over, wiping grease off his hands. "So, boss, we're building the impossible again?" Red chuckles dryly. "Kid, impossible's the easy part. Making it run, that's the trick." The air feels different now. The motor yard that once smelled of decay now hums with fragile hope. Engines cough, sputter, and fail. Red curses under his breath as sparks burst from the prototype's engine block. Too much pressure, Ortega shouts, scrambling to close a valve. Grace watches, tension sharp in her eyes. Red grabs a wrench and slams it down hard, the engine roaring to life for a fleeting second. The noise silences the yard. Soldiers glance over, startled. Then it dies again. Red exhales, half laugh, half growl. "At least it wants to live." Grace smirks faintly. "Then let's teach it how." The new chassis stands complete, metal gleaming under floodlights. Red walks around it slowly, his hand brushing the steel like it's alive. Ortega beams. "She's a beast, Sarge." Grace crosses her arms, trying to hide her pride. "You think it'll hold?" Red pauses, listening to the night wind whistle through the frame. "If she doesn't, it won't be for lack of trying." For the first time in years, his voice holds belief. The prototype's engine ignites again. This time it holds. The roar echoes through the night, deep and steady. Grace lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Red grips the wheel, eyes burning. Ortega whoops from the back. She's alive. The noise draws a small crowd of soldiers. Curious, hopeful. The desert wind howled through the open yard, carrying sand like bullets. The iron mule, Rurd's reborn truck, sat gleaming under the sun, its steel sides patched with the marks of midnight labor. Grace stood with her clipboard, sweat streaking through the dust on her face. "We're running out of time," she said, watching a convoy load fuel drums. Red grunted, tightening a bolt with his bare hands. "We were out of time 3 days ago." Ortega sprinted between crates, shouting over the wind. "Engines are good, Sarge." "But she's thirsty. Burns more fuel than a tank." Red shot him a tired glance. "Then we teach her to sip." Grace almost smiled, the kind that hides fear. Every screw they tightened, every hose they patched, none of it guaranteed survival. Somewhere beyond the dunes, Patton's men were waiting. If this machine failed now, so would the advance. Midday burns white across the base. Red wipes sweat from his brow, glancing toward the convoy forming at the gate. Grace talks with an officer who looks unimpressed. "You want to send that thing into combat?" He scoffs. Grace's jaw hardens. "I want to send our men something that doesn't quit." Red watches silently, every muscle in his arms tense. When the officer walks away, Grace exhales hard. They'll never believe until they see it. Red lights a cigarette with dirty hands. "Then let's make it something they can't ignore." Ortega climbs into the truck, slapping the dashboard. "She's ready, boss. Let's show 'em." Red nods once, slow and sure, the fire returning behind his eyes. The iron mule roared to life with a cough and a growl, spitting out a cloud of sand and smoke. Soldiers turned their heads, shielding their faces as Red climbed into the passenger seat beside Ortega. "Ease her up slow," he said. Ortega nodded nervously, pushing the throttle. The truck lurched forward, tires grinding into the sand but holding steady. Grace stood back, her lips pressed tight. "Come on," she whispered. The mule climbed the ridge, engine screaming, wheels kicking gravel. And then, like it had waited its whole life, it surged over the crest. The soldiers erupted in cheers. Red laughed, for the first time in years. Not bad, for worthless. Night falls fast in the desert. Flames from oil drums light the camp as Red and Ortega work under the hood again. Grace sits nearby, writing a report under flickering lamplight. "You think they'll send it to the front?" Ortega asks quietly. Red shrugs. "If they don't, I will." Grace glances up, the lamplight softening her sternness. "You really believe in it now?" Red smirks, half grin hidden behind his cigarette. "No. I believe in what it'll carry." A long silence fills the air. Wind, crackling fire, the hum of an engine that finally runs smooth. Somewhere beyond, artillery echoes like distant thunder. Dawn. A convoy stretches across the horizon, dozens of trucks ready to roll. The iron mule leads at the front, its engine purring low and strong. Grace watches from the ridge as Patton's command vehicles appear in the distance. Red climbs into the driver's seat, Ortega beside him, excitement barely contained. "This is it, huh?" the kid says. Red grins faintly. "This is where we find out if she's worth the name." Engines ignite one by one, a chorus of steel and grit. The sun breaks the horizon, washing the desert gold as the iron mule surges forward, leading Patton's advance into legend. Rain turned the battlefield roads into rivers of mud. The iron mule led the convoy through it, tires biting deep, engine growling against the storm. Red squinted through the windshield, his jaw locked. "Keep her steady," he shouted over the roar of rain. Ortega gripped the wheel, sweat mixing with mud on his face. "Feels like she's fighting back, Sarge." Grace's voice crackled over the radio, tense. "Convoy 2 just stalled. You're their lifeline now." Red pressed his hand against the dashboard. "You hear that, girl? You're carrying more than fuel today." The truck climbed a slick hill, slipping sideways, then catching traction with a violent jolt. Behind them, the rest followed, every truck trusting the mules lead through chaos. Red's pulse pounded in rhythm with the engine. This wasn't a test anymore. It was war. The convoy struggled through a narrow pass where the road collapsed into a trench of sludge. One by one, trucks bogged down, their engines screaming. Red jumped out, mud up to his knees, shouting orders. "Chain the axle. Keep her light." Ortega wrestled with cables, hands slipping, teeth chattering in the cold rain. Grace's jeep slid dangerously close to the edge as she yelled through the storm. "You'll lose the line!" Red's voice thundered back. "Not if I hold it." He clung to the front of the iron mule as it strained forward, towing a stuck truck free. Metal screamed, tires spun. But the mule didn't quit. When the other truck finally broke loose, soldiers cheered through the storm. Grace's voice trembled softly over the radio. She just saved a platoon. Night fell with thunder rolling over the hills. The convoy finally found shelter beside an abandoned stone farmhouse. Engines hissed as they cooled, steam mixing with mist. Red sat on the mule's bumper, hands trembling, too tired to light his cigarette. Ortega handed him a canteen. "You think she'll hold up tomorrow?" he asked. Red smiled faintly. "If she breaks, we fix her. Same as us." Grace approached, her uniform caked in mud exhaustion dulling her usual sharpness. "They're calling it the Iron Mule now," she said. Red chuckled, shaking his head. They should have named her Stubborn. For the first time, even in the cold and dark, they all laughed. Dawn broke gray and cold. Red knelt beside the mule, tightening the last bolts while Ortega fueled her up. Grace handed him a folded letter, stamped with Patton's insignia. "They want a demonstration. Frontline logistics." Patton himself will be there. Red froze, grease-stained fingers trembling slightly. "Guess we're not in the shadows anymore." Grace smiled. "You never were. You just didn't look up." He looked at the truck, sunlight glinting off her battered hood. "Then, let's give them something worth remembering." Hours later, under a canopy of gray clouds, the Iron Mule rolled into an open clearing, lined with officers and soldiers. Red drove this time, jaw set, every movement deliberate. Ortega sat beside him, unable to hide his grin. Grace stood near Patton's jeep, her clipboard clutched tight. The general himself watched, eyes like ice, expression unreadable. The mule hit a patch of mud and tore through it effortlessly. It climbed a steep embankment, engine roaring steady, never faltering once. When it reached the top, Red shifted gears and brought it to a smooth halt. Silence. Then, Patton started to clap. Slow, deliberate, commanding. "Gentlemen," he said. "That's how you build victory." Red looked down at the mud, streaking his hands, and smiled faintly. For once, his creation didn't fail him. The Iron Mule rumbled across a French field, scarred by tank tracks and shell craters. Red sat in the driver's seat, a cigar clenched between his teeth, watching the road unfold like a scar through the countryside. Grace leaned out the window, checking the convoy's alignment, her face streaked with dust. "We've made the front look alive again," she said. Red smirked faintly. "That's her doing, not ours." In the back, Ortega wiped grime from the dashboard with something close to pride. "She's got a heart, Sarge. I swear she talks to me." Red laughed quietly. "Then she's the only one who still listens." Over the ridge, artillery boomed, echoing like a heartbeat of iron and smoke. The mule didn't flinch. She just kept going. Steady, stubborn, alive. The convoy stopped near a bombed-out village. Smoke rose from shattered rooftops while distant gunfire echoed through the valley. Red climbed down, boots sinking into soft earth. Grace approached with a folded map. "They want us to push through the next sector tonight," she said quietly. Red frowned. "Those roads aren't roads anymore. They're graves." Ortega hopped down, brushing off his sleeves. "She can handle it, Sarge. She's tougher than she looks." Red looked at the truck, then at the boy, and sighed. "Yeah, kid. But not everyone made of steel survives the fire." "Still," he nodded. Orders were orders. The night roads were a maze of ruin and silence. The Iron Mule's headlights cut through smoke as the convoy crept forward. Red's hands gripped the wheel tighter with every distant flash of artillery. Ortega hummed softly, maybe to calm his nerves, maybe to fill the dead air. Grace rode shotgun, her gaze scanning shadows that felt too still. "You ever think she knows?" Ortega asked suddenly. "Knows what?" Red muttered. "That she's in a war. That she's keeping us alive." Red didn't answer, but his glance toward the dashboard said enough. The Iron Mule's engine purred low and steady, like she understood every word. Hours later, the convoy halted after an explosion echoed in the distance. A supply truck had hit a mine, Flames rose in the darkness, and shouts filled the air. Red slammed the gear shift, driving straight toward the fire. "We're not leaving them!" Grace shouted to the rear vehicles, her voice steady despite the chaos. Ortega clung to the side rail as debris fell like rain. The mule crashed through a ditch and stopped beside the wreck. Together they hauled soldiers from the burning vehicle, coughing through the smoke. One man, trembling, whispered, "Didn't think anyone would come back." Red just nodded, pulling him aboard. "You're riding with the stubborn one now." By dawn the smoke had faded, leaving silence across the valley. The mule sat parked beside the wounded trucks, her engine finally still. Grace leaned against the fender, exhaustion softening her face. "We saved 12 men tonight," she murmured. Red stood beside her, looking out toward the horizon where the first light crept through. "She did most of the saving," he said quietly. Ortega chuckled, slumped in the driver's seat half asleep. "She's got a soul, I told you." Grace looked at Red. "Maybe it's yours." Red smiled faintly, running a hand across the dented hood. "Nah, she's her own kind of alive." The roads of France were lined with victory and wreckage alike. The iron mule rolled through towns reduced to whispers, shattered windows, empty doors, and faces that stared as the convoy passed. Red drove in silence, eyes locked ahead. Grace sat beside him, radio in hand, relaying coordinates to Patton's command. Ortega rode in back, waving to children who appeared from the rubble, smiling despite the hunger in their eyes. "Funny," he said softly. "The war looks smaller from here." Red didn't answer. He was thinking about the soldiers the mule had saved, the ones she couldn't. The truck rattled over cobblestones, carrying ammunition, medicine, and memories. The iron mule had become more than a machine. It was hope on wheels, a heartbeat of steel, moving through broken Europe. Patton's push through France was relentless, and so was the mule. Day after day she hauled fuel and ammo across bombed-out fields. Red slept in bursts, grease streaking his face, hands raw from tightening bolts. Grace coordinated supply lines through static and shouting voices, her composure unshakable even as shells fell miles away. Ortega sang under his breath, songs from home to drown out the war's growl. One evening, as they loaded crates under twilight, Grace looked at Red. "You ever think what happens after this?" He paused, tightening a strap. "After this?" He smirked faintly. "I'd still be fixing something. Maybe her. Maybe me." They hit the road before dawn. The convoy stretched across misty farmland. Red drove while Ortega dozed beside him, boots on the dashboard. Grace rode behind in a jeep, radioing position reports. The hum of the mule's engine felt steady, almost peaceful. But peace didn't last. A sudden blast ahead tore through the lead vehicle. Dirt and fire filled the air. Red slammed the brakes, shielding Ortega as debris rained down. "Ambush!" Grace's voice cracked through static. Red shifted hard into reverse, turning the mule sideways to shield the others. Bullets ripped through the trees, pinging off her armored sides. Red shouted, "She's not built to fight, but she'll damn well protect." The engine roared, and for the first time the mule growled like a tank. The fight lasted minutes, but it felt eternal. When silence finally fell, the air reeked of gunpowder and fear. Red climbed out, chest heaving, inspecting bullet holes in the mule's sides. "She took the worst of it," Ortega murmured, voice shaking. Grace ran toward them, mud splattering her boots. "You saved them. Every one of them." Red looked over the convoy. Men alive, trucks intact, and nodded once. "No," he said quietly. "She did." His hand rested on the bullet-scarred door like a salute. For a heartbeat, the world went still. That night, as the convoy rested, the iron mule stood silent under a canopy of stars. Ortega slept against her tire, exhausted beyond words. Grace sat nearby, writing a report by lantern light. Red leaned on the hood, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. "She's taken hits, burned fuel, pulled men from hell," he murmured. Grace looked up. "And she's still running." Red nodded, eyes on the horizon. So are we. He exhaled smoke into the night, the ember reflecting in the mule's headlight like a heartbeat, refusing to fade. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled again. But it wasn't the storm this time. It was the sound of Patton's army still moving forward. In the North Sea, snow replaced the mud. France was giving way to Germany now, the roads colder, the silence heavier. The iron mule groaned under the weight of supplies as it crawled up a frozen hill. Red sat hunched over the wheel, breath fogging the windshield. Ortega beat his gloved hands together, trying to stay warm. Grace's voice came over the radio, calm but tired. Convoys slowing. 2 trucks slipped the ridge, Red muttered. They won't make it if this ice keeps up. He pressed the throttle, urging the mule forward. She growled back in protest but obeyed. Come on, girl. You've carried us through worse. The engine howled against the cold, wheels spinning until finally the truck crested the hill. Red smiled faintly through frostbitten lips. That's it. 1 more mile. Hours later, disaster struck. A rear truck lost traction and rolled halfway into a ravine. Supplies scattered down the slope. Red slammed the brakes and jumped out, boots crunching into ice. We're not leaving that load, he barked. Grace arrived seconds later, eyes wide. Red. That slope's unstable. 1 wrong move, and it's gone. He looked back at the iron mule, then at the dangling truck below. Then we use her strength. Ortega stared, disbelief on his face. You're gonna tow a full truck uphill on ice. Red smirked. She's done crazier. Chains clanged, engines roared, and steel strained under impossible weight. But the mule held her ground. Inch by inch, she pulled the crippled truck back to solid earth. When it was done, the men around them cheered. Grace just stared at Red, shaking her head with a half-smile. You're going to kill her one day. Red wiped frost from his beard. She's too stubborn to die. Later that night, the wind screamed across the valley. The convoy stopped near an abandoned farmhouse for cover. Red and Ortega worked under the truck's hood, their breath steaming in the dark. Grace approached, holding a steaming cup of coffee for each. You're both insane, she said with a tired grin. Red took the cup, nodding. Maybe. But insanity keeps engines running. Ortega chuckled, rubbing his numb hands over the flame of a lantern. She's getting slower, Sarge. Think she's tired. Red looked at the truck, her frame glistening with frost. No, she's just remembering every mile. Grace leaned beside him, their shoulders touching for warmth. The silence between them said more than any words could. The next morning, a blizzard swallowed the road ahead. Radio contact broke. Visibility dropped to nothing. Grace's Jeep disappeared in the whiteout. Panic clenched Red's chest. Grace, do you copy? Only static. Ortega leaned forward, eyes wide. We can't see a damn thing, Sarge. Red slowed the mule to a crawl, headlights barely cutting through the snow. Then, a faint glint of metal ahead. He stopped, jumped out, trudging through knee-deep snow, until he found her Jeep, half buried, engine dead. Grace sat inside, shivering but alive. You picked a fine day to find me, she said weakly. Red grit. You do the same. He pulled her into the cab, wrapping his coat around her as Ortega pushed the throttle. The iron mule pressed forward again, carrying all 3 of them through the storm. They reached camp at dawn, half frozen but alive. Red parked the mule beside a line of tanks, her engine sputtering, coughing smoke. She's done, Ortega said softly. Red shook his head. No, she's resting. Grace leaned against the doorframe, face pale but smiling. You saved us both. Red looked at her, then at the iron mule. She did. I just held the wheel." Snowflakes drifted through the open window as the engine finally went silent. Red exhaled deeply, his breath fogging the glass. "You've earned it." The wind carried his words away, but somehow it felt like the truck heard everyone. The war was ending. Snow melted into soft earth, and for the first time in years, silence didn't sound like danger. The Iron Mule sat in a clearing outside Frankfurt, her paint chipped, her engine tired but still whole. Red leaned against her hood, helmet off, staring at the smoke rising from a peaceful horizon. Grace approached with a folded dispatch, Patton's final orders. "Convoy, stand down! It's over! Red didn't move." "Over," he repeated, like the word itself didn't fit in his mouth. Ortega walked up beside them, hands buried in his pockets. "So what happens to her now?" Red smiled faintly. "She goes home. If anyone remembers what home looks like." The three stood there in the quiet, the Iron Mule between them like an old friend who'd carried them all the way through hell and out the other side. The convoy disbanded one by one. Trucks that had survived the worst were parked, tagged, and forgotten. Red supervised the unloading in silence, his hands tracing dents and patches he remembered fixing by lantern light. Grace filled out final reports, each signature feeling heavier than the last. "Feels wrong," she said softly. Letting her sit still, Red nodded. "She's earned her rest." Ortega approached with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Sarge, they're scrapping most of the old transports. You think they'll—" His voice trailed off. Red's silence said enough. They all looked at the mule, and none of them spoke again. The war had taken plenty, but giving her up felt like losing another soldier. Weeks later, the Iron Mule was shipped back to the States, nameless among hundreds of machines that survived. Red followed her transport order, his signature scrawled at the bottom. "Property of U.S. Army Logistics Command." Nothing about her story or the lives she'd carried. Years passed, and the war became memory. Red took work in a small factory, grease still under his nails. Sometimes he'd hear the hum of an engine down the street and swear it sounded just like her. Grace wrote him once a year. Ortega sent postcards from every state he drove through as a mechanic on the road. They never said goodbye. They didn't need to. Some bonds, like steel, don't rust. Decades later, an old man with steady eyes and calloused hands walked into a museum. The sign read, "Vehicles that won the war." Red's cane tapped against the polished floor as he made his way through the exhibit. And there she was, the Iron Mule. Restored, painted clean, her bullet holes filled but not forgotten. A plaque read, "Model unknown. Prototype supply vehicle, believed to have served under General Patton." Red ran his hand over the cold steel. "Unknown," he whispered. "You always liked being mysterious." A young guide approached, smiling politely. "Sir, do you know anything about her?" Red smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Only that she never stopped moving." Outside the museum, the afternoon sun painted everything gold. Red sat on a bench beneath a row of flags, the sound of distant traffic humming like engines on an endless road. In his pocket was a photo. Grace, Ortega, and him, standing beside the Iron Mule in 1945, smiling through dirt and exhaustion. He looked at it, then at the sky. "You carried us, girl," he murmured, "all the way." A breeze stirred, and for a second he swore he heard the low, steady rumble of her engine again. He smiled, closing his eyes. Somewhere beyond the years, in the roar of every truck that ever rolled after her, the Iron Mule still drove on.